Hi guys, I'm here today to do my July reading wrap up. Now July wasn't a massive success because whilst I feel like I've had lots of time to read, I sometimes find that when I have loads of time I don't read as often, and I tend to read more when I'm having to sort of cram it in smaller amounts of time, perhaps because I sort of appreciate the smaller amount of time I have more. I don't know. So I think I finished 9 books this month and I am halfway through about 4 books, but not brilliant, and it wasn't a great month in terms of ratings either, though I have enjoyed lots of books but just haven't given any books 5 stars. So I'm going to crack on with these books. I finished Salvaged by Christy Bowen, which is a poetry collection. I quite enjoyed this. I find with poetry I can admire the beauty of the language but struggle to really completely understand the poems, so I certainly enjoyed this. I think it's really beautifully written, it has lots of themes I really enjoy, but I still don't think I got everything out of it that I could have done. So yeah, if you're more into poetry than I am, I definitely recommend this, and it's certainly one I enjoyed, but just wish I could understand poetry a bit better. Then we have The Pink Institution by Stella Satterstrom. This is a sort of experimental novella. Effectively, it follows a family in a southern state from, I think, the time of the Civil War to the present day, and it mainly follows the females in this family. There's lots of daughters, and it's incredibly experimental. So some of the story is written like that, some of the story is written in vignettes like that, some of it is written in list form, some of it there's photographs, all sort of weird and wacky things, and I could admire some of the beauty of the language and some of the topics she was handling, but the experimental nature of the novel just didn't gel with me, and I felt like I was missing things. I feel like I'd like to read a proper novel about this family and about the stuff she was talking about that happened to these sort of southern families, but I feel like it just went over my head. So I gave this 2 stars. It's got really high ratings on Goodreads. I think it's one of those books that if you get it, you'll probably love it because it feels accomplished. It just wasn't for me. So I wouldn't say don't read it, I'd just say, you know, make sure that it's your sort of thing. So yeah, not for me. Then I listened to an audiobook of Into the Water by Paula Hawkins, and I gave it 2 stars. I think if I had perhaps had not listened to it and read it, I would have perhaps given it 1 star, but the audiobook sort of lifts it up a bit. There's several narrators who do the audiobook. It's effectively a story about a woman who gets a call because her sister has just drowned in this place called the Drowning Pool where they grew up, and she's been called to be the legal guardian to her teenage niece. And then you get sort of interconnected stories, mainly of other women in the village but a couple of men. And I just think she got a bit muddled. She tried to do something sort of interesting with this historical references to this drowning pool where supposed witches had been drowned, but I think she got a bit lost in the symbolism, and actually it just became this really tropey mess, and fairly predictable. And there were some themes that I thought were interesting about the 2 girls. There's some flashbacks of when they're young sisters together. I thought those were the strongest elements of the novel. Those bits felt quite interesting, but other than that I think she just lost herself in just a really stereotypical crime drama, so not a big fan of that. Then we have When God Was a Rabbit by Sarah Winman. So I recently read Tin Man by the same author, which just came out, and I adored it and gave it 5 stars, one of my favourite books of the year. So I decided to go back and pick up her other novels. This is her debut, and I thought I preferred the sound of this to her second novel because the second one is about an old lady and this is about a young girl, and I really enjoy stories about young girls. Now I have really conflicted thoughts on this one. So this is about a young girl who's born in 1968 in England, and she's called Ellie. And half of the novel is her as a child. There's an incident with a neighbour which sort of shapes who she will become, which I won't spoil. And that incident sort of really ties her to her brother, who's a few years older than her, so they're incredibly close. And she also has a really close friendship with a girl down the road who comes from a very different family background. So the first half of the novel is really taken up with those relationships, and the second half of the novel is when she's around my age, so in her late 20s. She's sort of lost and unsure of her life. Her brother now lives abroad, and she lives with her parents, and they're running a sort of B&B, and it's about some of the characters they meet through the B&B. Now, this is my difficulty with this novel. There's loads of themes in this novel that were in Tin Man, were repeated. There's even character names that come up again in Tin Man. So I feel like Sarah Winman felt like she wasn't quite done with some of the things she utilised in this novel. So she can write her feelings of nostalgia, of this cosy comfort, some of the way she describes really small moments is beautiful. I love the way she talks about like small stereotypical British things and sees the beauty in them. However, this felt like a debut to me, and what I mean by that is I sometimes find with debut novels, and there's another novel I'll talk about later which I had the same issue with but not quite as much, is when a debut author has a list of all the themes and the plot lines and the character devices they want to use, and they're so excited to write a book, they just put them all in. And what should happen is they, or the editor, should say, right, there's too many things in this one novel, let's take some of these out and focus more strongly on the things you've got left. And that isn't what she did here. So we've got this strong relationship with her brother, this strong relationship with this friend, this thing that happened to her when she was young. Then we've got this sort of eccentricities of her parents and what's going on with them. Her father has this history going on. And then we've got these old people who come into their lives when they're running the B&B. And then something happens later on in the novel, which I won't spoil, which is connected to sort of a big world event, which wound me up even more because I felt like we already had so many themes in this novel, so many storylines, that this one extra thing that was a really big thing wasn't given enough time, and it was just too randomly put in there. So I still think it's good, I'm still glad I read it, but certainly Tin Man is such a stronger novel. I feel like she actually decided to stick to certain points and work with them. I mean, also this book skips a lot of years quite quickly, so I felt like I couldn't really connect to Ellie as much as I would like to. So I enjoyed it, but I think Tin Man is, you can tell it's her third novel and not her first. So yeah, there's that one. Then we have a couple of novels, and I think it's interesting to sort of talk about these two at a similar time because I gave both of these 3.5 stars, and the struggle with these books is that they're entirely different types of 3.5 stars, and this is why I find the ratings on Goodreads quite difficult. And if you watch me on Goodreads, you'll notice sometimes that I go back and forth and I change ratings months or even years after the event, and it's because sometimes I think, oh, I gave that book 5 stars and I also gave that 5 stars and I feel so differently about those. But a sliding scale of just 5 points is so difficult to compare like non-fiction to fantasy, or like a children's book to like a really hard-hitting literary fiction. And so sometimes I think I just shouldn't do ratings anyway. But anyway, these are interesting to discuss in that sense because The House Between Tides by Sarah Maine I enjoyed, probably one of my most enjoyable reads of the month, but it has a really big flaw which really lets the novel down, hence the 3.5 stars. Ninefold Make a Paper Swan by Ruth Gilligan is expertly written. She can write, the way she uses words, the structure of the novel, the topics of the novel, all really interesting, but I didn't care. Like for whatever reason she didn't make me connect. So, but I gave them both the same star rating. I'd say this is a better novel, but this was the more enjoyable one. So it's whether you rate Goodreads based on enjoyment or quality, I guess. So I'm going to talk about this one first because I did actually enjoy the other novel more. So I decided to pick this up because Anna and Eric are doing a book club, and I'll link the details down below, and this is the fiction book they're reading this month, so there should be a video about that soon which I'll be watching. And I had it on my shelf, so I thought, well, I might as well pick it up and read it. It's not too long, it's just over 300 pages, so I can join in the discussion. And I can see why they've chosen it because structurally it's really interesting, but I just didn't connect. So the way this is structured is that we have 3 characters in 3 different timelines. They're all connected by either being Irish or Jewish or both. And as you get further through the novel, you'll start to be given hints as to how they're even more connected than that in some ways. So the first narrative starts in the 1900s, and we follow a young girl. Her family are Lithuanians and they're Jewish, and they decided to leave Lithuania and head to America. And their boat, for whatever reason, docks in Cork in Ireland, and they think they've arrived in America and they get off the boat. So that's their storyline. Their second storyline is in the 1940s, and it's a young man who's been put into a mental hospital because he stopped talking, he's gone mute, and his mother and father have decided to put him in this mental hospital. He's one of the only Jewish patients there, and it's his story of why he's mute and how he feels about being there. And then the final story is a story that's quite contemporary. I think it's set in 2014, and it's an Irish girl who lives in London, and she has a boyfriend who is Jewish, and he has just asked her to convert to Judaism so that they can get married. So those are the 3 storylines. Now the other interesting thing about this book is that there's 5 sections for each character. So you go like 1900 storyline, 1940s, 2014, 1990 again like 5 times. But the 1900 storyline jumps 10 years in between each section. The 1940s storyline jumps a month between each section, and the present day storyline jumps a day. So you get 50 years of the first storyline, 5 months of the second, and 5 days of the third. So it's interesting, and the way she writes is superb. So I can't really do it justice in a video like this, but I'm going to link Jennifer's video down below from Insert Literary Pun here, and she had quite similar feelings to me about the book. I think she gave the book 4 stars and enjoyed it slightly more than I did. I have a real difficulty when I don't connect to characters. It's my biggest reason for writing a book down, and this really was that for me. So beautifully written, really interesting, uniquely structured, the themes that keep cropping up, these tiny little words she uses in sentences that crop up 100 pages later and you pick up on, incredibly smartly written, but I just didn't connect to any of the characters. And when I don't connect to characters, I really struggle to put my finger on why that is, what's missing from the narrative or from the writing style that's made me not empathise with these people, or just not necessarily care about them. And I can never say what it is, but for whatever reason I just didn't with this one. So I look forward to hearing what more people think about it, and if anyone feels the same way as I do, then if they have any ideas as to why that is, because I can't quite figure out what's missing, but something was. So I gave that 3.5 stars. Now this one is completely different. This is The House Between Tides by Sarah Maine, and this is what you'd class as like a really easy read, right? It's certainly more of a sort of autumnal winter read, so I'd recommend reading it in the colder seasons if you can. I read it in the summer and still really enjoyed it, but it's certainly suited for those colder months. It's compared to Daphne du Maurier and Kate Morton. I haven't read any Kate Morton, but I have read Daphne du Maurier, and I can see why that connection is made. In terms of a contemporary writer, I think she hits that target if you want to read something along those lines. So this has that sort of often used trope of a storyline in the past, and then something happens in the present in which the person in the present starts to find out more about the storyline in the past, and this is that. So in the present day we have a lady called Hetty, and her grandmother has just died, and her grandmother owned a house and a sort of country estate on a remote Hebridean island, and she inherits this falling down house. So she decides to go there because she's thinking of moving there and converting the house into a hotel, like a luxury hotel with a spa and a golf course. And so she goes there to visit. And when she arrives, when they start to survey the house, they find a body in the ground that's been buried, obviously hidden away. So an investigation begins to do with that. Then you have the storyline that's in around 1910, the early 1900s, which is a woman who's just married the artist who owns this house. He's slightly older than her, and they've gone to stay in the house for the summer. And there's lots of conflict going on there. His father, I believe, built the house. The islanders are very upset by it. A lot of their land was sort of stolen off them. Their livelihood has been taken. He's killing all the birds on the island and stuffing them for art. And there's just an awful lot of conflict. And there's loads of stuff I can't really do justice in just talking about it here that I really enjoyed. I studied wildlife conservation at university. Lots of the discussions around what the community was owed came up a lot in my course, and lots of stuff about the way the birds were treated, and whether you leave a habitat. You know, I can say I'd love to live on a remote Scottish island in a big old manor house, but when you consider that in order for you to do that you've actually got to have a negative effect on the environment by being there, it's not so easy to make the decision. So that comes up a lot, really enjoyed that. There's lots of romantic elements in this book, isn't something I usually enjoy, but I do in this sort of cosy read. I started to draw a family tree. These families' lives historically are really intertwined, so I really enjoyed figuring it all out, and I guessed most things right, but I still really enjoyed the process. So part of me loved this experience. However, the lady in the present day is so vapid and so weak and so infuriating that I couldn't give this higher than 3.5 stars. She literally, there's two strong male characters in the contemporary storyline. She literally just does what one of them says, then changes their mind and does what the other one says, and then changes their mind. I mean, her storyline ended in exactly the way I thought it would end. She was just weak throughout, and she really let the novel down for me. So still really enjoyed it. I'd still recommend it, but I just know going in that she's annoying, right? The author is bringing another novel out in the autumn, which is set in Canada, which is actually where I think she's from Scotland, but she emigrated to Canada. So I'm very excited about that one, because I definitely enjoyed this book. It's a nice, fun, sort of cosy historical mystery with a bit of romance, and every now and again I like a sort of easier read, and this was that. And the descriptions of the landscape and the weather and the animals and the local community I thought were really strong. So there's that. Then we have How Saints Die by Carmen Marcus, and I was kindly sent this for review by Harville Secker. Now this is the other debut I was going to talk about, which I felt had a few too many themes. I really enjoyed this book, but perhaps too many things were juggled. So this is set in, I think, like the 1980s in a small Yorkshire coastal village, and we follow a young girl called, let me just double check, Ellie, who lives with her father, who's a fisherman. At the start of the novel we find out that her mother has recently been taken away to a mental hospital because of an incident. And so we follow the story of Ellie with her father. They live quite I guess that their family isn't as modern. They don't have a TV, and they don't have lots of mod cons, they don't have a car. So she lives quite a different life. She's very intelligent, she is very wordy, the way she thinks and talks is very different to other children, so she's picked on at school. And intertwined with this sort of, so what I've said to you before, I really enjoy British stories about working class families where the focus is on a young girl, so I loved that. I also love stories that are focused on fairy tale and myth, and this has that in abundance. So Ellie has been raised to believe that her mother was a Selkie, and her mother comes from Ireland, and you're almost led to believe that like the father trapped her there in Yorkshire and didn't let her go back. And Ellie has been told that she was fished out of the ocean. There's a storyline with a wolf, that may be this sort of mythical being as part of the novel. It's beautifully written. I think some people wouldn't like it. There's no quotation marks. It's third person, but it's sort of written in the language that Ellie would speak. And the way Ellie speaks is very much focused on, she's very literal in the way things sound and the way she views the world in this magical way. So an example of this is, Fletcher's mum leads them past a big blue clock, the colour of summer sea. It has hands that move by themselves, and it tells time, but it also tells the sun and the stars. Ellie looks at the stars her dad has shown her, the Big Dipper, the North Star, and there they are on this clock, their same sky tucked inside. She snaps it all inside her head to take back for her dad, who would love to see the Starro clock. This is his clock, Ellie thinks. No crash bang tick tock, just the slow blue arc of stars, where he isn't old because the days are too small to matter. So I really enjoyed this book. Wonderful themes, wonderful writing style, and I loved all the elements of mythology. I just felt that towards the middle it dilly-dallied a bit, it lost itself a bit, it got perhaps too many themes. I thought that perhaps maybe the wolf didn't need to be there, like it was enough to have the stuff that was going on with her mum and the Selkie narrative, and the real life, like the realistic stuff of like her struggles at school and the social workers sort of getting involved with the family, without the wolf also being part of the story. I really enjoyed it, will definitely pick up anything she reads in the future. I gave this one 4 stars. So the last two I'm going to talk about very briefly because I'm going to review this one. This is a short story collection called Madame Zero by Sarah Hall. I was very kindly sent this to review from Faber. It came out very recently. I really enjoyed this one. I'm going to read another couple of short stories. I've barely been reading any short stories this year, and this made me realise how much I've been missing them. I really enjoyed this. I'd highly recommend it. A mixture between realist and magical realist stories, but all of them are quite upsetting, and they're all quite strong storylines, and they all in their own ways deal with wildness, and whether that's literal wilderness like the outside world, or whether that's sort of these uncontrollable urges or emotions. I thought this was great, brilliantly written, and I haven't read any of her other books, but I certainly will now. I have 2 of her novels, so yeah, I'll be reviewing this because I really want to go more in depth about the stories in here, because I thought it was great. And this one I've already reviewed. I also gave this 4 stars. This is Men We Reap, which is a memoir by Jesmond Ward. I did a review on this with The Hate Race by Maxine and Benaber Clark. Really enjoyed both, would highly recommend them. So those are all the books I read in July, and like I said, I'm about halfway through 4 books, which I won't talk about here because this video is too long already. So do let me know if you've read any of these or if you're planning to, and also Feel free to let me know how you rate on Goodreads, and what your thoughts are about if you tend to read less when you have more time, or is that just me being bizarre. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!